Dumelang, Sanbonan. Welcome to it. Manifesto Unpacked with Bafana Modise is proudly brought to you by Podcast Party. We are live with African Congress for Transformation. In the studio, we do have the lovely lady, Angela Moloko. Angela, she's from African Congress for Transformation. Angela, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Are you well?
Oh, I'm very well.
Super duper. Tell me something. This is more of a youth show, young people. So be free, don't worry. It's not a serious interview. We're engaging with the youth across the spectrum who are literally waiting for this, one of the biggest election in the country. But before we even go further, let's start with yourself. Who is Angela and how does she find herself with the Ace?
Yes, so I'm a social justice advocate. I initially got involved with politics through Fees Must Fall. When students started coming together and saying, hey, there's a lot of structural education inequality. And as I went through my education at WITS, I witnessed it firsthand how students were just treated so differently. And I felt a real reason to actually get involved and play an active role in a solution. And, when it just exploded and became a national movement, I was so, disappointed to see that we had politicians who did not take the issues of creating access for the next generation seriously. And when I look at Ace Magashule, his track record when it comes to education is unblemished and it's unrivaled. He's put kids through high school, he's put kids through university, he's helped them create generational wealth, break the poverty cycle. So I felt very in tune with working with Ace.
Lovely, because you are right. I remember there was a program that he ran with Cuba for students at the time when he was the premier of the Free State. Right?
Yes.
So we know Ace from the ANC, but I don't want to talk about him today. I want to talk about the party. ACT. Who is ACT? Why is ACT existing? Tell me more. Give us a background of who is ACT.
Well, ACT essentially came together when he realized that, as a leader, he had capacity to do more and felt that he wanted to play a greater role in improving South Africa. So like-minded people started surrounding him and saying, do it, please, represent us. You've always represented us. You've always been on our side, and we can engage you in a way that very few politicians engage and respect us as young people, as students. And as people amassed around him, he said, I'll answer the call to action, and he stepped up and he leads. So it's been a very interesting journey. It's a young party, but it's definitely not a small one. And definitely what it stands for is so important to the future of South Africa.
True. And one thing that I've seen, your slogan is Amadela Gofa.
Yeah.
Amadela.
Yeah.
Right. And let's now take it to your one of your key manifestos or your key messages, right? And I like the fact that you are very direct and clear on what you are going to do. It's basically education exclusion. You're looking at economic exclusion, teenage pregnancy, human trafficking, water shedding, unemployment, load shedding, landlessness, exploitation, corruption, inequality, poverty, racism, drugs, crime, and GBV. And these are the issues in society right now. I'm glad that him as a former struggle hero, he didn't go around and start speaking about the historical what. He went straight into, he didn't speak about, exile and how he fought the whites and Mkhonto Wesizwe. He literally stick to what is needed in the country. So I'm going to start with one key issue, education exclusion. Young people right now, Angela, they are so tired of going to varsity every single year, not to get funding. NSFAS is not doing what it's supposed to be doing to some extent, as you've seen the headlines as of late. And your party, if it takes power, how will it manage to service the youth of this country, who some of them leave varsity, some of them, they leave high school and they go to varsity hoping that they will get funding? How will you guys assist the youth of this country to make sure they have access to education?
Yes, well, education is multifaceted because we've just heard them focus on ECD, but even when we look at now, tertiary is in such great jeopardy. Students go in, they come through NSFAS, and by the time they leave and get a job, they are buried in debt. Once upon a time, the government that invests in people used to give out bursaries. They used to give you a grant and say, go study. So when you started your working life as an adult, you weren't already drowning in debts and obligations, and you could actually invest in your home, your community, your family, and that's something something that ACT is very passionate about, and Ace particularly. When he was Premier of the Free State, they gave out so many bursaries, particularly towards STEM students who now work overseas. They work in South Africa. They have degrees. They are qualified specialists. And these are skills that South Africa is definitely short of. So we definitely believe in bursaries, and we believe in also fixing the high school education too.
True.
It's great to say let's fix university, and we hear the president talk about Tinswalo, but the part of the Eastern Cape Tinswalo's from, they don't have nursery schools, and the ones that are there are very overburdened and under-regulated. We've seen politicians tear a new one and say, from everyone who has experienced in the struggle, this is not a depiction of reality. So how he came to a conclusion alone that no one else in South Africa agrees with is just beyond the country. So fix it from the ground up. Start creating availability, and you need someone who can actually be committed towards this. Start creating access to education from the ground up. Nursery schools, better train primary school teachers, create capacity in primary schools too, give talented children opportunities, put investment money into infrastructure of schools so that kids can have things like science labs so that they learn early on, And Ace Magashule has traveled so much and worked with so many nations and seen the models that they've applied from China, from Germany, the different models that they've integrated. So bring those successful models like larger high schools with better facilities into South Africa. But you can't do this when you have a candidate who is inexperienced. You need someone who's actually been through it and really understands and sees the people who need this as actual human beings, not just voters.
So I think I like your approach when you say Ace is very, very, very much experienced in the education part of things. But then the question that somebody would say to you is that, but he was a premier for 20-something years in the Free State. And most people, even though, yes, some did go to Cuba, but in terms of skills development, how is it that it's only now that Ace is sounding more radical? Meanwhile, he had the opportunity, the time, and the power to do what he wants to do now. Why couldn't he just do that in the past 20 years in the Free State?
Well, a fundamental problem with politics in South Africa is people talk and they don't do. And Ace Magashule is not really just a talker. He actually goes and does. So what you see is that in the Free State consistently tops the charts when it comes to the matric pass rate.
True.
And all of that started from the investment he put in when he was premier, retraining teachers, having holiday school academies, making sure that children who were talented in the rural areas could get just access to education, to textbooks, to the resources that go into learning. And all of that started when he was premier, and it's very much a part of his legacy. So, to simply divorce it from him, when since then we've actually seen the Free State take a bit of a backslide. We've seen a premier who has cut funding, we've seen him cut investment and resources. Teachers no longer go on, not as many teachers are sent on educational camps so that they are upskilled. So we've seen that actual setback take place after his term, which really just shows you that this is not a party policy. This is the particular person who was actually invested in this.
Lovely. I think one other issue that we have to look at when it comes to young people is that the education sector, usually you have people who are only looking for varsity, right? And you still have those who didn't even finish school. You still have those who did not even manage to get into varsity. There is a TVET sector that is very much neglected, but people are going there every single year. Some of these learners can't even finish school in TVET colleges. I'm sure you know about the NCV project, and they also have the NATED project there. And what I see there as well, it is that it's a good opportunity for those young people who might not have the access, maybe their marks were not so good for varsity, to actually go and gain a skill. So how do we, through ACT, give young people skills development, apart from just going to school and graduate, but rather being a plumber, being a boiler maker, being whatever the profession is, mechanics and all of that? How is ACT going to ensure that kids, the youth who are not necessarily university material, but also still have an equal opportunity in South Africa?
That's a very good question, and no political party has answered it yet, which is heartbreaking. Education, especially going to university, is a feeder system. You prepare for it from about grade 9 and grade 10 when you start to choose your subjects. Giving children information, giving them a realistic version of what their options are so that they understand. Having school faculty members who are actually dedicated towards assisting students to apply, because your school should actually be assisting you with this. It's part of the educational outcome you need at the end of the day. So ACT wants to definitely invest into giving schools better resources to be able to channel children appropriately, give them career expos. Every year, Free State hosts massive career expos where children from all over the province, rural children are bused and they can access it. They're given an opportunity to see, engage, understand for themselves. These expos and career fairs help children figure out what they also want to do themselves and understand what's going to be needed of them to succeed. I used to volunteer at a school in Davidson, and there were so many children there who wanted to be doctors and scientists. But in grade 10, they were channeled towards doing math literacy, which locks you out of any kind of STEM subject. And they were channeled by teachers protecting their pass rates. So it's very heartbreaking when you see that someone's future is just basically thrown under the bus because we have a pass rate to protect. It's more about the statistic than what actually happens to the learner at the end of the day.
Yes.
Create that opportunity and hold the people who fail to create that opportunity accountable.
Because as you said, I support the idea that you need to create that space where every kid, whether they have a B on their metric or maybe they have a C or a D, they are also part and parcel of the economy, which is the other issue that I'm going to, the economic exclusion. When you say economic exclusion, I'm a young person in South Africa. Please make it easier for me to understand.
Well, economic exclusion are really just social barriers that rise above you. For instance, if you are a child who was born into, let's say, a child-headed household, you are automatically going to have less resources. You're going to have less structure and less of a parental figure who can manage and maneuver. You may find, like one of the many households in South Africa that's child-headed, that you have scant and very rare income, very limited income resources, and you yourself are with someone who doesn't know how to do that. And it may sound like an exception right now, like why child-headed households? But this is actually a real crisis exploding in South Africa now. Malnutrition, child-headed households, these things actually are seeping in and they affect what happens at the end of the line. You can't send a child to school hungry.
True.
So it's a case where with ACT, we actually want to make sure that these kinds of problems are addressed within the socio-economic context.
But that's the thing, Angela. Today, the youth of this country, over 50% of them are unemployed. Graduates are unemployed. And I think it binds into the economic exclusion at some point. They are not active in the economy. They are not part and parcel. Some of them are literally they've given up on the idea of jobs. Every politician right now is promising jobs, but nobody's telling us how are you going to provide those jobs. Tell those young people how ACT will provide those jobs.
Well, because we believe in education and it's necessary to develop our country, it's a very fundamental investment for any political party to make. You've got so many students last year who graduated, they have medical degrees. There are literally hundreds of people sitting who are qualified medical doctors. They cannot get a job. Government has a shortage of hospitals. It also has a shortage of doctors in those hospitals and trainee doctors and people to handle smaller things like checking up on patients. And the whole healthcare system around that has kind of broken. You need to have a government that's prepared to invest in that, building hospitals, employ these doctors, and the wealth trickles out. Our government spends such a fortune right now. Yesterday, we've just seen Sona. We've seen so much military presence there. We've seen 100 police on motorbikes riding in front of a police-protected motorcade for the president. And then when it comes to education, when it comes to investment in infrastructure and socioeconomic rights, we have no money. When it comes to fixing load shedding so that people can get an operation done in a hospital, we have no money. So this is a real problem because government spending needs to be restructured, and that starts from the top down. Otherwise, you'll see that constant economic inequality reign supreme.
So the question is, you're investing in what, small, medium enterprises so that they can absorb these young people to employ them? Are you looking at probably working with the private sector and open some sort of a channel where there could be some skills exchange? Hence, I'm asking for the how, because right now it looks like this job thing is just a PR stunt, or it is just a promise, right? Our president, he promised us 6 million jobs in 2019. But today, there's still a lot of young people who are unemployed. Even it's going higher each and every single year. So I'm trying to look at a how-to type of thing to say, how do we create these jobs? Do we go and say, we are going to work with some companies? Are we going to start investing more in small, medium enterprises so they can absorb and hire people? Because it's very true that it is not the state that creates jobs. It is the state that enables the environment then the environment itself, the business environment, will create jobs. Do you agree?
That is true. But South Africa, we've got a beautifully blended financial model, unlike other nations in the world, where the state actually can play a direct role in creating jobs. Because, for instance, yes, we are open to partnerships with private companies. It's very important. Skills transfer, expertise transfer, experience. These things are vital. But at the end of the day, the state also has resources that it can have and use. Take, for instance, Denel. Denel is a state-owned enterprise. It deals with military hardware, but it also employs a lot of people with STEM degrees and qualifications. If you can use a project like Denel and start allowing students who are studying to get exposure, to intern, to work, to work there and to produce vital things and components that are necessary to run our nation for different departments, be it for public works, be it for other elements of government. This can help create employment. Our military can also assist in that regard too, because if you look at South Africa now, most of the pilots that actually came into SAA were trained under, if you look at apartheid, they got their education being pilots through the military. That's how they learn to fly. Piloting is a very expensive skill. So the state is capable of creating employment. It doesn't have to take a back seat. And then at the end of the day, we are told, no, the companies will do it. We've created the groundwork. We've given tax breaks. But then when there's nothing to show for, you then have a leader who's happy to outsource the accountability for that instead of taking the burden on and saying, you know what, it is I who failed you. It is I who did not create jobs. It is a comfortable scapegoat to say, I'll create the conditions, companies will just do it and we'll be done there. And that's a very romantic version of what it means to lead.
There was someone who said to me, Bafana, I appreciate my 350, but I feel like it's an insult from these guys because this 350, they just spend it on a bottle or a lunch somewhere in Sandton, but they think that a young person can survive a full month unemployed on a 350. Do you think that 350 was some way a good plan, or do you think we could have rather ran with a fixed amount like 2,000, 3,000? I mean, if you're gonna give out money and try to meet a need, you rather meet the need, but don't look like you are trying to meet it. Because with 350, to young people who are graduates, to young people who are energetic and young, do you think that the 350 was just a way of soothing the people, the relief fund as they called it by then during COVID? So what is your view as a young person on the 350s?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking as ACT. We see that you have all this idea where you say, we need comprehensive social reform. And people say, here's 350, which doesn't even get you through inflation. It doesn't open your opportunity. It's barely enough to buy food or pay for any kind of meaningful shelter. So I think that the problem we have here is that you've got this kind of one-size-fits-all solution, and that does not work in a country with such diverse problems as South Africa. You need more targeted, more appropriate solutions for the people that you're dealing with. If there are students who are in school, give them bursaries. Don't let the support end at 350 because you end up leaving people high and dry. And I think when we have a president who can comfortably in his election rallies for a month spout out and say, if you don't vote ANC, you're not getting that 350, it is so disrespectful and undermining to the electorate. It is so heartbreaking to hear a president who himself was a product of scholarships and university education now turn his back on where he came from and say, hey, vote ANC or that money is gone. It's such a rich dad attitude. It's really insulting to our electorate, and I think South Africans deserve a lot better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't just want me to vote, give you a whole vote to govern a country for a mere 350 bribe, because if that is the case, you're literally telling the youth that we are bribing you with a 350. It's either you vote or we take it out.
And how do you see South Africa as a dependent state with no potential? No, this country has tons of potential. You get children who come from the poorest households where they must study by candlelight just to get through matric, and they go on to become engineers. You cannot have that.
There's potential in this nation.
There is tons of potential. And we are such a young nation. We are one generation into democracy, and we have already had to address so many burdens of generations before us. Things like Bantu education, you know, all this backlog we've had to deal with, landlessness, lack of access. Where do you live? How do you afford property? People locked out of the banking system where they couldn't own homes. Now when you have to go and apply for a loan, you don't even have a title deed feed because you live in a village? How do you get access to capital? We have all these generational old issues that our nation has been very transparent about naming, addressing, and saying we are going to fix. So we need a president who can respect people enough to understand that everyone is pushing together to work on a solution, not just say vote ANC or your 350 is gone. You see people as dependents.
I think that was one thing, but when I heard another leader say, if you have a degree, it's 3,000. If you have a matric, it stays at 350. If you have it, this, I think I can just say his name, Julius. He said that at one of his rallies. So I tend to see this as if like it's some key campaign strategy. Promise people some benefit, and then hopefully they would vote for you, and that the benefit becomes a welfare. A couple of years ago, we had food parcels. Then it went to 350, and now it seems like it's moving towards these grants that people are given. Do you think that we are moving towards a welfare state? In your thoughts?
I think that, we need to look at South Africa's history before we look at the future. Welfare is a vital mechanism. These grants are useful, but we also need to put a sunset and a character to them. It cannot be an infinite thing. And that's why I say when you give people tools that assist them to make means for themselves, you are giving them something that will help them build wealth rather than keeping them dependent on a subsistence fee. Give people an education and their skill will help them get a job. And if they cannot get a job, they have the knowledge to start a business. True. Or at least manage their financial affairs. You are not forcing them to turn around tomorrow and come back to you and be dependent because they don't have alternatives. So I think with ACT, that's what we are more passionate about, actually giving people the means to do it. And that's why even our political manifesto, we've been lectured that it's light, but because we actually have a track record to show for and things that we actually do that are concrete, that is what has shaped and governed the party so far. It's very democratic.
I think I would love to see that because democracy means a lot of things. And are you guys a liberal? Are you guys center, social democrats? How would you define the party's ideology and approach?
Well, I think we're somewhat a center-left party. Definitely when you look at it. Like now, for instance, South Africa needs a myriad of solutions. We don't just need economic solutions. We also need legal solutions. And that means you need to have someone who is going to reform. I was heartbroken after seeing the Act Sinawe campaign and the kind of gender-based violence it has unpacked. I was heartbroken to see how deep it is. Young girls who have been violated and harmed, and then their homes have been torched by a community that has turned on them. We see these things all over. Mpumalanga, we hear people from Limpopo telling us about how they were kicked out for reporting rapes. It is just heartbreaking seeing this. And it's the story of a lot of women in South Africa they're forced to live within shame. I was so disappointed to hear during SONA that our president, after all these public consultation, all these meetings, all these briefings, all he could say is we as government commit to pledge that we will, as men, we will end GBV. What happened to being a president? Do you not have a whole National Assembly that can change laws? Do you not have judges who can introduce things like mandatory minimums? Is there nothing concrete you can do to protect your citizens? Human trafficking is a real problem in South Africa. We seem to just move on from problem to problem and not find solutions.
Yeah, somebody said it's more like in South Africa, we maintain the problem, we don't fix it.
We do.
We maintain problems in this country. We manage problems. You don't just fix the problem. It's that you manage it, you maintain it. To some, it makes them money. To some, it's just, I don't know what. But I'm going to go into this idea. When you just spoke now about human trafficking, we have an issue with illegal immigration in this country. And a lot of young people in this country feel like these guys are stealing our jobs, even though I have a different view about the jobs issue. I have a view that it's only because of greedy business people who tend to exploit, and they are looking for an alternative labor. So if they can hire, if it's between Bafana, myself, and some guy from Zimbabwe, they'll take the guy from Zimbabwe because he might be cheaper and there is not much regulation around that. But then not only with jobs, you also have an issue with crime. Because of illegal immigration, you have an issue with border management and human trafficking. That's why today is at its highest. People are literally missing. You would think before it used to be something so far. But now you see it happening like every now and then on Facebook, missing person alert. What is your stance as ACT on illegal immigration?
Well, South Africa, we've come from, again, that rich history we have. And I think that the biggest thing to do is not to look at something and try to find a scapegoat, but more a solution. Because as much as we say that, well, the borders and everything are a problem, the implied aspect of this is always that some people belong and other people do not have a right. And South Africa, our history, our African allies and nations have always stood by our side. So in these tough times, we need to stand by them and not give into easy scapegoating, like saying, you're illegal, you don't belong here. Because when you look at the history of South Africa, there are a lot of people who count as part of this country who one time or another were told they do not belong here. Even us as Black Africans were told we don't belong here. We were sent to Bantustans. So empathy for that is important because, as you say, the real issue in this lies in the way that our economy is structured. A lot of the time people think human trafficking is taking someone in a truck and putting them across a land border or anything. But sometimes it's also people just taking their children abroad without permission from the other parent and kidnapping them. That's a huge problem too, and it's something that happens amongst the wealthy. So we should be careful not to label it as a problem of the poor. We as Access South Africa can work together. We are not homogenous people, but we have a homogenous interest. We all want to see this nation develop.
So
while we scapegoat, we can't come with a solution.
Are you telling me open borders?
Not open borders, managed borders. I think that people seem to think that having an administrative system that functions means you are kicking everyone out. We are saying let it work, let people be documented, let people be tracked, because it is also for the safety of people who come into this nation, I think we've all seen countless news shows that show women being smuggled from Lesotho to work as nannies and domestic workers in South Africa. And that kind of exploitation is a problem too. So we are trying to protect people on both sides. The people here are not the villains, it is the system. So correct the system, make it manageable, but don't give into this very crude xenophobic rhetoric of you are not a South African, you don't have a right to be here, you don't belong here. Because more often than not, we've seen this, I don't want to name the political parties, but we've seen that rhetoric come from people saying that you are not a South African, you don't have a right to be in this country, but at the same time, they are not part of the groups where they are trying to exclude and marginalize people. So on what authority do you speak?
I think maybe they speak from a view that most of movements or political parties, they tend to excuse the right of rule of law to say, if I go to Zimbabwe today, I must go through a border post, give them my passport, and then someone will give me a permit to say you are here until this time. And that's what we speak about. I think it's what we mentioned when you say border control management, but also you need to control also immigration. Can we take 50% of the whole Zimbabwe into South Africa? Is it feasible for a nation that has 55% unemployment rate to actually take in 50% of the population of Botswana or Malawi? It's not feasible. So hence maybe some people feel that maybe they might be expressing it in a view that it's maybe it's fault of hate and whatever. But when you look at the fact, it is that it can't be that we have 50% of another population of another nation within the nation, and we have a lot of people who are in this country undocumented, illegal here, and somehow something needs to be done. A rule of law must take place. Don't you agree?
And I agree with that, and we completely support rule of law, but we also support equal application of the rule of law, because again, the way that this is framed so often, it becomes Afrophobic, where it is just the Africans who are a problem. South Africa experiences a ton of immigration from Europe too. We have people who come from Eastern Europe. Not too long ago, we saw Rado van Krejcir, who entered South Africa from the Czech Republic, specifically for the purpose of not being able to be extradited. And yet nothing has been done about that kind of immigration. We have these very hostile tones. That's why we say as ACT, as much as we have problems, we want equal border management, so that it doesn't end up this very skewed picture where there is a wrong type of person and a right type of person, and we are going to pick and choose based on color. That's also very negative. That also spits in the face of our history. We say border management, we say make it equal, and we say make it impartial, which we can.
No, I think I support the idea of equal application or to that. If you arrive at the airport from London or from wherever, you need to be able to produce your details and know who you are and how long are you going to be here for. But speaking of color, South Africa's history is very racially polarized, right? We all know the history of, some people don't want to admit it, but we still have a race issue in this country. We still have the youth of this country who sometimes don't see race as a main issue, but they see the economic issues as main issues. And they don't think that race is a stumbling block. But to some extent, it is. When you look at the systematic racism that has been happening throughout this. As ACT, are you going to push an inclusive approach, or are you going to be a pro-black government?
Well, ACT has been very inclusive towards everyone, you know. We've even seen the idea that it's always black and white, but there are other races in this country too. We've seen Gates and McKenzie take colored people and kind of homogenize them, blend them into one pit and say, I am here for all the colors. But colored people are not one central homogenized race. Like they have different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds. You know, there are African colors, there are colored people who speak Setswana, they speak Xhosa, you know, they speak Sesotho. And you need to be representative of that. ACT is inclusive towards everyone. It's not a matter of skin color. It's about being pro-South African. We all want to see this nation develop. We all want to find our place in it to develop. So it's a case where when you start to exclude and shake down who has a right to that and who does not, you actually end up hurting more what your nation represents. And that's a very sad thing to become a part of, because then you become just as bad as the people you tried to remove.
I like your answers, I must say. I like your answers. They're very direct and very clear. They got a good lady for the job here, you know. But, you know, Angela, the youth right now in South Africa, if you travel to Soweto, Tepisong, Tembisa, the number one thing that you would see on the streets is guys selling weed. Some are on drugs. Now there's also another pandemic where you call them nyaupes, which I don't like. You see that a lot of young people, we are losing good value, like we are losing the value of youth, you know, the drug abuse in our society. Yes, you call it the groove culture, or you call it monate or mugruvo, but it gets to a point whereby now it becomes a self-destructive. To the youth of this country, what can you promise them to deal with such issues? Are you going to provide a free drug rehabilitation? How are you going to address this issue where we have more drug addicts than before in South Africa? You have more people drinking and abusing alcohol as young as 10 to 12, 13, 14. How can we solve this societal issue, and which is very prevalent in both black, Indian, colored, across board? How will ACT address this?
Yes, so what we need to realize as well with South Africa is that when we look at who these people are and how they're affected by this, part of it is a lack of opportunity. A lot of children get taken in by this at a young age where they don't understand. We already have functional principles within our education system, within our healthcare system. Our healthcare system already does provide rehab. What needs to be happen is it needs to be scaled up and made more available and accessible to people who need it. Our education system as well needs to be able to take people in, because it's difficult to rehabilitate someone who's never been, you know, habilitated, for lack of a better word. Like, if you've never had opportunity, you've never had access, are you so wrong when you veer down this path because you did not know an alternative? So even with Age Act, we are very passionate about improving and access to the education system. Allow children who have who have these, you know, needs and conditions to be able to go and say, okay, I need to recover from this. I need a holistic kind of approach where I can do rehab and then get access to education. Now, when children are taken off, let's say the streets, for instance, you know, you get a lot of nyape children who find themselves being homeless. They're taken off the streets. They are forced into this. And then after they go through rehab, they are just released, given nowhere to go, given nothing to eat, given nowhere to stay. They fall back into that life because it's all they know. So you need better structural solutions. You need a government that understands the problem. So that's where we are going to definitely put our focus on, because we are a very youth-centric party and we care about youth, you know, issues the most.
Angela, what are you going to do? Are you going to build rehabilitation centers? What are you going to do?
Yes, we're going to scale up the availability of it, because as I say, government does not have enough. They are in government hospitals. There's not enough. We are going to also open educational opportunities for these children who've been rehabilitated to have an opportunity to meaningfully recapture the years that they lost, so that when they go into the world, they have a skill that they can use to provide for themselves.
Lovely. You know, I think as we speak about this youth issue, which is something that you have listed on your your list of things that are very strong and needed in South Africa. Teenage pregnancy, the high school environment is not the same as we knew it, the 90s babies, right? Also, the society itself, we are so highly sexualized. If you go on Twitter, there's too much porn. If you go, now we have Wi-Fi, there's porn availability. You have all these things happening around. How do we then manage it not to reach the classroom where young people are easily to consume such content and find themselves being hypersexual? That's the word to use, because I kind of feel like what we see on TikToks, what you see on the streets, is not something. How do we stop it? How do we only just, apart from just saying to us, use condoms? I mean, we come from a generation where 18-year-olds, you say, I won't break my virginity until I'm 18, right? You come from an age where girls would be like, I won't break my virginity until I'm 21. But now it has become such a norm that sex is basically more like alcohol, weed, oka pipe, sex. This is the fun of a young person in South Africa. What is your view on that?
Yeah, it's very sad. And this issue isn't just a South African one. It is ravaging the world right now. And it's heartbreaking because you look at it, children are so exposed nowadays. It is so hard to filter what a person who is under 18 can access on the internet versus what someone who is above 18 can access. They really are so aware of all these platforms. They know how to use TikTok and Instagram better than most adults, you know, but they're in high school. So the exposure is a huge thing. And then if they are immersed in an environment where this is the case and it's all they see, it's going to become normalized and accessible. And I think that the biggest thing with teen pregnancy is that we often look at, you know, young girls and we say, well, why are you pregnant at 14 or at 15? But we have a huge prevalence of intergenerational relationships. We never deal with the underlying problems and they come back to negatively affect us. And we say, why is this the case? But you need to hold where there are perhaps adult actors who are in the wrong, hold them criminally accountable. We've seen students in schools who've been molested by teachers and fallen pregnant. Nothing is done about that, and they do not make sure that it ripples through the law to a special form of protection. We have a whole legal system and a constitution called world class. It should be stepping in to protect youngsters from this. You know, teen pregnancy is a problem. We need to give young women opportunities so that they don't get trapped in this. And then at the end of the day, we say, why are you 16 and a mother? But if a person who did not know any better was coached into this, introduced into it, and economically coerced with things like money, protection, social security, you know, whether it's a sugar daddy who every week he gives you 100 rand when you get off the taxi, to these kids that means a lot. There's a lot of that type of grooming that happens. We never hold these people accountable. We need to start getting the justice system to hold these people accountable. We need to start dispatching social workers to the problem.
True. And how do we use education in school? How do we use education to kind of bring this awareness to these kids, or to curb it? I don't think we can. When you are right, intergenerational. Sometimes I'm 30 and I'm dating a 19-year-old. Obviously, it's gonna be is my influence, right? There is people who are dating, they are 40 and they are dating probably a high school kid, and you're like, dude, but why you dating a young girl? And sometimes it becomes that influence. But then how do we use education? I remember when I was at school, we had something called LO, life orientation, but which sometimes was more about sex, and you were laughing in class, like, you know, when the teacher talks about sex. But then do you think we can somehow improve the curriculum to be more direct, but to work towards not necessarily promoting? Because I think it was more about use condoms, use what, you don't, whatever. Can't we use the curriculum maybe somehow in schools to kind of curb teenage pregnancy?
I think so. You definitely can still use the curriculum as a tool, you know. There was a nation abroad where when domestic violence was prevalent, what they started doing was introducing self-defense classes to young women in school, because they figured that if young girls grew up understanding how to defend themselves, they'd never fall into a pattern where they could become victims as adults. And so we need to also look at that we are shaping the next generation with this. They have to grow with that expectation. They have to grow with that understanding. We can use the curriculum, life orientation, and schools to bring in specialists to do larger classes where they train these young women, they empower them, and not even just to say the only victims are young women, because boys can be victimized by this too, and often their plight goes unspoken.
True.
So we need to actually start using the schools to become educational safe spaces, safe spaces where these kids can learn and deconstruct this and be taught it and also recover. We have social workers, schools have therapists. We need to start using these resources and scaling up. Education, Department of Education gets the largest budget outside of healthcare in South Africa, and yet it does not trickle down to affect and benefit the learners. We need more of that money directly going to what is going to improve the lives of students and learners.
Angela, some of us, we've been privileged enough to be behind the microphones because this is what we do, this is what we love. Some are on TV, some they're in the creative industry, the arts, the sports, and the culture. We have the Ministry of Arts, Sports and Culture that wanted to spend, I think, $1 billion, 21 million on a flag or something of that sort. This country, it's a movie. And
it's a horror movie. It's heartbreaking.
Right? So, and then what you see is that whenever you see them in action, it's when they are at a sports tournament or final, and the minister will be shaking hands with the who's and who's. They'll be at the music awards and all of that. What is the responsibility of the state to nurture talent, to groom it, and to somehow ensure that the youth of this country, or how act itself, how will it do that to make sure that the youth of this country don't just become those guys who, man, he's a good guy, so he used to be great in soccer, but now he's just a guy in the township. This guy used to be great when he was young with chairs. Today he's just a clever thing, and they don't go anywhere unless you apply maybe 3 times more pressure on yourself to get there. How do we make this or put doors open through act in government? How are you going to ensure that the young talent, creative side of things, how do we get them to be active in the industry and be supported in approach here?
Well, one thing I really liked about Ace that really led me to feel like I'd made the right choice joining ACT was that I saw as a leader how he doesn't leave you high and dry. So I know a guy who I studied with at WIT, and he got there because of a scholarship that he got from Free State for matric. He started studying computer science and he finished at WIT, and then afterwards he didn't have a job opportunity, he didn't have an option. Ace took it out of his time and attention to coordinate a scholarship for Boysons. He went and he studied a master's in electrical engineering in Turkey. And now he's qualified. He's a senior engineer for a massive company there.
Wow.
And and he supports his whole family with the money he earns. I went to go visit him one time coming from an international competition. I passed by Turkey to visit him. And the way that they were living, they were set up to live so dignantly, so well. It was better than how he was set up when he was studying at WITS. And when Turkey fell into revolution, because I don't know if you recall a few years ago, they tried to stage a coup. They found themselves kicked out because they were attending the university where the coup leader was. They found themselves kicked out and homeless in Turkish winter. I kid you not, that winter was snowing. It was freezing cold. They had no money. Ace took his own money and gave them accommodation. That's a leader who doesn't desert you. So I had tremendous respect for that, because I'm like, sure, any politician, you call them at Christmas, tell them I'm homeless, your phone is going to voicemail. They're not going to answer and they're not going to respond. But Ace took his own money and made sure all of those students were sheltered. He made a plan. And when he called me and he was asking, we don't have a home. By the time I got back to him and we tried to rally here, he said, no, we are covered. We are taken care of. That's a leader. We create opportunity, but don't leave people high and dry. Don't abandon them halfway. You're a leader who makes a promise. You see it through to the end. That's what we need in this country that we don't have now. Political willpower. That is why when you look at the 2018 SONA, and you ask yourself, our president has had 6 years to rule. What has he accomplished in 6 years? It is nothing.
Yes.
The promises are still the same ones he was making then. And interestingly enough, when Zuma was campaigning, our president said, a real leader does not go back and tell you what happened 40 years ago or 30 years ago and try to take credit for you. He tells you what he's doing now. But now, all of a sudden, when Cyril Ramaphosa is the one running, he tells you a 30-year timeline chairman of the ANC. He uses metrics from 2004 and tells you South Africa has grown. But even when you look at his math, the math doesn't math. Our population has tripled. Our population has tripled. Our unemployment has doubled. You know, and then he tells you, no, our country's growing. This math doesn't math, Chief. It doesn't add up. So you can't have a politician who makes promises and doesn't even respect his voters or the people who depend on him enough to see it through.
The thing that I like your answers, Angela, on the idea that you can start initiative, don't let people, don't leave them hang to dry, but be with them throughout the process. And I think that's what has been the issue with a lot of initiatives. So I remember a couple of years ago, I started doing my media stuff. I think then I was very ambitious. I started doing public speaking, and I was doing a bit of debates. And we had something called what arts and recreation, blah, blah, blah. And I don't even know how far that thing went. And it just left us, I think did it for like a month or two. I think politicians have that thing when they get funding for a project for like 6 months, and then it runs, then they chow the money, then it just dies off. You don't even know where that money went. What I've always also seen as a pattern in our government, it is that the youth are usually used to push politics of the elders, and then at the end of the day, it is the same youth who don't get the same opportunities. It's like you are pushing for someone to be a mayor, and you are still going to be the guy Kokasi who is dependent on the mayor for money and e-wallets and stuff, just mere servants of leadership, as they call them. All right? So how do we empower young people within political spaces like yourselves, not just to be the people down there in political parties, but really to become active leaders in the parties?
No, that's very true. And South Africa has a real deficit of that. We are so prone to ageism. Even when young people try to step up to lead, you can hardly find a space. Look at our parliament now. Look at our cabinet now. Everyone there's over 60. I'm 30. If I go join the cabinet, they look at me like I'm their grandchild. They can never see me as an equal. How can you? I'm supposed to call you like Ramogolo. Where, on what, in what, you know, Tatemogolo, in what world are we equals?
There was a guy who said you are Delela in parliament, right?
You know, the condescension is so real. And we started to see these cracks with Julius Malema, and we've seen them get deeper. I mean, I think Cyril Ramaphosa could be the age of my father. I can never tell this man you are doing this wrong. I can never speak to him in a true sense as an equal. Create a space for young people to flourish, and that is very, very scarce, you know? And if we're going to say to them, come out and make a decision, because youth is a transitive phase, you really need to use it while you've got it. Use it or you'll lose it, you know? And it's a case where when we tell people, come out and vote, people like to sit on the sidelines because they feel that they don't have a space. But no one's going to give you a space because there's a real interest behind why they lock you out. It is for you to step up and organize and say, I am going to do my best to take that space. I'm going to claim that space. I'm going to assert myself. Step up and vote, you know, because when you do not make that decision, you allow other people to make that decision for you. The ANC never messes around when it comes to its elderly voting base. They do their best because they know that they show and they step up. So you find a leader as well who represents your interests like that, and you make sure you put that person there, or you'll never have a seat at the table.
Okay. We are going straight into this one now. Land. Umhlaba. Yeah, you should not say land. I can just see things growing.
The rolling hills, the green fields, the rivers, Africa.
Right. Do you think, as much as I understand the value of land and the importance of land, but this continuous promise of land, and even having these consultative processes where people are being told about land, do you really think young people care about land, or they just want to be economically active?
Oh, yes, vitally so. And, you know, I can speak to this in a very personal perspective. I'm a third-generation farmer. My grandfather was a farmer. He had 400 cattle and a 10-bedroom home, and they got forced out by the apartheid government. All his cattle was seized, and their home was torn down. Till my grandmother's end, like the last of her days. She had Alzheimer's, but she's still crystal clear in her mind, had that memory of being forced out of her home and watching it torn down. She used to have nightmares of it. You know, my father was a farmer too. He was involved in a ton of agriculture agricultural projects, you know, pigs, cattle, goats. He was a successful farmer. And now my sister's a farmer. You know, she does vegetables, and I'm a farmer. I do flowering herbs and medical plants.
That's nice.
So we really do take this very seriously, because land in South Africa is not just an economic issue for a lot of Black Africans. It is deeply sentimental. The land we farm, it has been farmed by my family for over 100 years. It is not just about us owning this piece of land. It's about the economic access that comes with it. When you have land that comes with a title deed, you can use that to get a loan from a bank. You can start a business. You can build a B&B and open a hotel for people to stay at. You can start a small shop. You can even rent out that land for agriculture. You have all these opportunities that come into fruition. And that is why people fight so dear to hold on to lands with title deeds. It is vital we address that inequality.
The thing that I have with it, Angela, it is that how then do we deal with the issue of land? Do we do a socialist way, let the state take their land? Do we give each and every single person a portion of land? How do we then redistribute it? Because I kind of feel like right now, the most pressing issue for young people when they go to vote in the next election, they'll be looking at a party that can provide them with jobs, stability, economic prosperity. And yes, the land issue, yes, is still an issue, but is it... how can I put it? Is it a pressing issue that pulls them to vote? Why? Because it has been abused for so many years by different political parties. Land, and we don't see it. And the question is, do you really think that young people identify? I'm not saying they don't need land. Everyone knows the value of land and how it's important. But do you think it's what compels a young person to say, I'm going to vote for this party because I want land?
Yeah, you know, the thing with land is that it's not something where when you look at an empty field, like I say, the fields of Africa, when you look at an empty field, you instantly see everything that it can become, and you see that. But it's about having the means and the access. The communal land system is not entirely flawed, but it does need improvement.
True.
If you gave people fields to farm and told them, invest small money in seeds, and we as government will incubate you, we will meet you halfway until you scale up to a point where you can become commercially independent. You go do a training course, even if government pays for that training course, and then come back with your money, invest in it in seeds. Then when you need to buy fertilizers, we'll meet you halfway. You know, we have silos, we have mills. We also have a food insecurity crisis in South Africa.
True.
It is very vital that we redistribute land and see it being used productively so our nation can have food security. So we are failing on two fronts right now by not redistributing the land and not getting the gains. Government can play a very good role being a broker between both. People don't see it as urgent. People don't see it as something that pays off immediately. But if you give people gradual step-by-step development, and you now get stories of people who started off with government assistance and are now commercial farmers supplying the likes of your Joburg market and your finest restaurants, you know, this is what helps people move forward and feel it is investable. They need to see success stories. And we have a government that pays lip service to it, does not deliver, and then at the end of the day says, well, now why does no one believe in this? They've taken the seriousness, they've taken the real tone and the value of it out of the chain.
Young people in this country in 2024 elections, they are saying, I might vote, I might not vote, because we are fun. All we are having is a recycle or a spin-off of someone to someone. ANC gave us EFF, it gave us ACT, it gave us Mkhonto Party, it gave us all these other parties. And somebody says, aren't we just recycling? Aren't these just bitter people opening bitter parties, hoping to stay in power because maybe their pockets are running dry and they want to stick around into offices of power, and they're just using these tactics because they have nothing else to do except politics? Your view?
Very true, because, I mean, last local election, I really did not want to vote. I hated the fact I had to give my vote away to candidates who did not represent me and did not hold my moral and economic interests at their core and did not deliver on that. So what I say is that when you don't use your voice, someone else will take it from you. And that is the problem with not voting.
True.
You know, people look and they say, why does ACT exist? You know, why does ACT have a reason to exist? But you know what? The ANC has hemorrhaged tons of talent, you know? I mean, yesterday we saw our president take credit for the direct district development project and say that it has done so much to improve living standards in rural villages. And yet it was done by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma during her time as the Minister of Kokta. And yet he fired her from that position. But now you take credit for a project that was hers. Naledi Pandor, we've just seen her deliver a sterling victory at the ICJ. She's changed the face of international law, and the way that it will be read and practiced and the way people now want to access their rights. And yet she is not running for president. NDZ is not running for president. And it is so sad because you have all this talent, but yet it is not what ANC is bringing forward. They are not bringing the best forward, And you ask yourself, why do they keep hemorrhaging talent? But this is why they will continue to hemorrhage talent.
On the issue of foreign policy, this is what you brought in, Lady Pando. On the issue of foreign policy, we have an issue in Congo, we have an issue in Zimbabwe, we have an issue in many other states in the African continent, and also how we align ourselves as a country. We are more on the BRICS side, the Global South, as they call them. Is it the Global South? I think so. Yeah. Yes. Do you think that our foreign policy must still run in that fashion, or should you rather be more diplomatic in approach and appreciate how can I put it? When you have an issue in Zimbabwe that has been running for the past 30 years, don't you think it was more important and more pertinent as an African country to go to the ICJ to speak on Zimbabwe than to actually go and hotspot a conflict in Israel that could have probably been done by Syria, Egypt, Turkey? Why was it our responsibility as a country so far in Africa to take that charge? Meanwhile, our African neighbors are suffering.
Well, South Africa plays many roles because if you look, for instance, at the African Union, we had sent Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma there and she was the chair. And she led to a lot of structural reforms that helped bring a lot of balance and better relations between African nations. She was sent by our country there to represent us. She did a great job. But it's a case where when you say international relations, why do we speak at the ICJ for Palestine and not for Zimbabwe? Palestine and the ICJ, that is the platform to speak about it. Zimbabwe, we provide assistance and we provide support in other ways, directly through things like SADC, directly through things like, business relations and tax breaks. They are our direct neighbor. We have sent in our military before to enforce, to secure, to assist. Even now in Congo, there's this whole drama that's happening where, not to trivialize it, but, Congolese forces being funded by other nations in Africa are rebel forces are advancing on the city, threatening to take Goma, and it's going to cause a lot of instability.
Because apparently there are 6 million people that have died in Congo.
Exactly.
I think that's a real genocide.
Yes, and it's same as Sudan. It's also gone undercovered, and it's so painful to see it take place. The truth is that right now South Africa's military is what's stopping those rebels from advancing. We are playing a direct role.
What I'm trying to paint a picture of our foreign policy might be more factional and not necessarily more in tune with not with the realities of many. It's more functional in an idea that if it's Russia, we are okay. If it's America, we hate it. If it's this, we are okay. If it's that one, we are selectively choosing issues. Is that what ACT will be doing as well? Selectively applying their minds regardless. Because I feel like if we have the same idea of to say we are fighting genocide, we will start in Congo and then go to Israel. If you are fighting this, we will have an equal principled approach. Not necessarily a factional issue. Or, we are an alliance of Russia, so you can't say anything wrong about Russia. Is that the way to manage a country?
No, we don't view this as a partitioning of speech. So what we as ACT also believe is that you have to play a role in the world where you can deliver the most. Some time ago, we tried to stand up and have relations where we defended Cuba and we protected them. But Cuba has always stood by us historically as an ally. So that loyalty is also returned. And we have other nations who have stood by us in apartheid, and we return that loyalty in different ways. For the idea of foreign, international aid, if you will, is a very diverse plethora of investments. It doesn't just come from saying we're going to take these people to the ICJ. I mean, you could argue, why did we never take America to the ICJ for Cuba? But it's about you using the options you have before you to the best of your abilities. We stood by Cuba when Lady Pando wanted to fund them. She wanted to assist there. They did not allow her. They took her to court to say you cannot fund Cuba. But Cuba has historically been an ally of South Africa, so much so that they've educated whole doctors for us through their universities. They helped us during COVID. They stood by us. we need to be able to nurture that relationship. And we give that assistance in various ways, So just because we are not taking people to the ICJ, which, by the way, historically does not listen to third world nations, it does not listen to African nations and their concerns. When the Lancaster House talks broke down, the ICJ could have stepped in there too, and they did not. So it's a case where when we do go to these courts, they're not necessarily listened to. They've got a history of being very Afrophobic. But with the step we've taken with our Palestinian brothers to say, you know what, we empathize with what we're going through, we are all on this ship together. That is something so powerful that unifies us across nations, across races, across religion.
As we're about to wrap up now, I think one thing that we need to talk to young people in South Africa, most of them, they want a reason. Why should I vote for Ace Magashule? What new thing can he bring to me? On your manifesto, you spoke about corruption, and he's been somehow labeled as part of one of the leaders who were corrupt in the Free State, and notably the issue of the dairy farm that took place with the Guptas. This is one person that has led the Free State, but if you go through Bethlehem, you go through Free Jones Kroon, you go through all these other places, they're literally dying down. There are no roads to Free State that are properly clear, unless you're on the N1. But if you're not on the N1 and you are using any other roads, he has not delivered on that. But yes, he has done some good stuff on other things. Why should the youth of this country recycle Ace again back into power? Meanwhile, he has had his chance. Shouldn't that let him to go and retire and go for another person? What more can he offer?
I think there's a difference where you have a political candidate who goes into office and then does not deliver versus where you do have one who actually shows the capacity to deliver and says, allow me to return. And that's the thing with Ace Magashule. He didn't fail the first time around. He fulfilled his promises. That's a lot more than we get with many other politicians in South Africa. One thing I like about him is how direct he is. And even though people come with all these legal allegations, he is very prepared to meet you in court. He says, go investigate and bring the evidence to a court. And you know what has come out of all these allegations? Nothing. Just smoke, just fiction. Nothing of concrete evidence has been produced against him. And yet you see all these swirling allegations. So it's like, if you don't agree with him, you're more than welcome to take it to a court and let the judicial process follow suit. Now, he is also accused of negligence. When you say the dairy project and all of this stuff, what he's accused of is the negligence of oversight, which is a strange one for the government to suddenly get high and mighty about, when at the same time, you've got Bladen Zimande, our Minister of Higher Education, who has failed to oversee NSFAS and see it being successful. In 2019, they appointed an administrator, Randall Carolison, to NSFAS, and he said the whole system needs to be rebooted. And since then, he's done nothing to improve the administration. But there he is, in spite of all the students saying he must go, he retains his job. Why? So at the end of the day, if the ANC is now going to say oversight is our most critical thing, they need to put their money where their mouth is. You want to talk state capture? You want to talk corruption?
Step aside.
There are so many issues happening in South Africa. The fire sale of state assets. We've seen the SA Agalas, a very important research vessel, 1/5 of our navy. Remember, we're a country with 2 oceans to protect. They've just sold that ship to Germany rather than renovate it. They sold it with no public transparency or accountability. You want to talk state capture? Look at what happened when they were trying to fire sell Eskom and split state assets. And look at what's happened with SAA, and that's a Takatso hearing where these assets were happening, all these deals were happening under the table. No resolution has been made. Deals are happening under the table. Our president has money in his sofa, but he doesn't know why it's there and it's not his cash, but he wants it back.
Angela, why should they vote for ACT, the youth?
Because at the end of the day, ACT delivers. We are not a product of a failed, embittered leader. We have a leader with a successful track record who is genuinely committed. His entire career has shown that. And while people say, why does the ANC hemorrhage talent? It hemorrhages people who are capable. They are the people who get the most frustrated, the most exhausted with seeing apathy and failed governance. The Free State was run so efficiently underneath Ace Magashule. And he can actually return that formula because nothing about the candidate has changed. The candidate was not the problem. It was definitely the institution. And we see that continue to play out now. So when you vote ACT, you've got someone who will be held accountable by you. He is willing to do that.
Lovely. One last question, then we're done. we have over 300, I think by now, political parties registered to vote, to registered on the IEC. And out of all these 300, you have the popular ones, which you all know, and we have the others that are coming out like yourselves, Rise Mzansi, Action SA, and all of that. What makes you different? And because this is only a newborn baby, you don't have experience in governance, even though, yes, you have a leader who has experience, but the party itself has never governed before. So therefore, the question is, what makes you different from all these newborn babies, or even the ones that are popular? What makes you unique? What is a unique selling point?
Well, in South Africa, we've seen that we've got Ace Magashule. He's a leader who comes out there and he's willing to be held accountable and say what he believes with his chest. He stands by his belief and doesn't pander to whatever crowd is listening. We've just seen now how hard they have pushed the multi-party charter. I find it so fascinating how a political party that came to exist yesterday, hasn't written a manifesto today, is prepared to say we'll form a multi-party charter. On what basis are you going to perform? Because you don't even have your own standard. ACT is prepared to stand on its own. ACT is prepared to stand 10 toes tall and say, you know what, this is what we stand for, this is what we will do. We are a youth-centric party, and these are the people who will drive the future. You're not going to have a minister who's 70 making decisions about teen pregnancy without consultation. You're going to have a young and engaged forum of people from all walks of life. People think of Ace Magashule as being a Free State-only candidate, and that is simply not true. He has embraced people around the country. He has done not just door-to-doors, but direct campaigns where he speaks to people in every language. He is part of that conversation. He goes and he immerses himself in that community.
No, whenever he walks into a room, you hear that is
exactly. And because people know their candidate, they know their leader, they can access him. It is so hard to find a politician in South Africa you can hold accountable. But Ace Magashule is very prepared for that. So I have much more respect for that.
Angela, thank you so much. I think you have covered every of my question, answered it very well. And kudos to Ace for taking a woman like you to be on that seat. I'm so excited, and I'm hoping that the youth of this country have listened to you and they will make an informed decision when they head to the polls in the upcoming election. As most people have said, the youth must go out and vote in their numbers.